For young jazz musicians, I tell them practice, 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 of course, like any musician, but also make sure you train your ears.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to 7 Minutes with our very special guest, Marcus Miller. Marcus is a true music legend. He's a bassist, he's a composer, and he has worked with so many fabulous musicians. Marcus, welcome and thank you for being here.
Of course, it's great to be here.
So I wondered if we could go back and talk about your personal story and how you got into jazz. I read somewhere that you were a classically trained clarinetist. How did you move from that into being interested in playing jazz?
Well, I come from a musical family. My father was a piano player and he played the organ also. And he did all the things that local musicians do. They play the church service. They played for weddings, they played for funerals. Whenever people had to get together, my father was there to provide music because that's what music does so well, is bring people together. Anyway, my father, all of his sisters, my aunts, they were all singing and playing music. So come from a very musical family. We grew up in New York City. And when I was about 8 years old, the New York school system offered 3 instruments: trumpet, drums, and clarinet. Of course, I wanted to play the drums because I was 8 years old, and that's the coolest instrument to an 8-year-old. But we lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn, New York, and my father said, yeah, no drums. So I ended up on the clarinet. And even though it wasn't my first pick, I enjoyed it enough to stay with it all the way through the university, right? But when I was 10 years old, I heard Michael Jackson and his brothers. They were called the Jackson 5, and they were my age. Michael was 10 years old, maybe 11. And it just blew my mind. I was like, whoa, these kids are my age and they're already professional musicians. And that really excited me. I already had a musical background because of the clarinet, because of my family. So I got into it, but I couldn't find a space for the clarinet in soul music, funk music. So I decided to pick an instrument that was central to that style of music. This is the 1970s. So I chose the bass, and I fell in love with the bass. So I kind of came up on 2 tracks. I would play classical music in school, and then I would play the funky bass outside of school. So it was a kind of cool combination, even though I looked kind of funny with the long bass case walking down the street with the tiny clarinet case in the other hand. But besides the way it looked, it was a very cool way to come up.
I mean, it's an amazing instrument. And so how did you begin performing? Talk about that transition.
In New York, they had talent shows. The community organizers, in order to give kids something to do, they would say, look, if you have some kind of talent, it was the local neighborhood version of American Idol, but it was with all the bands, and so we would all, each band would practice so we could outdo the other band. And it was a nice, beautiful, friendly competition. Every block, every street had its own band. So instead of having a, sports contest or whatever else you could do to show who was the coolest, we had musical contests. So we were playing all the popular songs of the 70s and seeing who could perform them the best way. So that's how I got into performing. And of course, you realize the effect that music has on people. People dance, people sing, people forget their problems. And it was just, I fell in love. So I knew early on that's what I wanted to do. So I basically became a musician by the time I was 14 years old.
And since then, you've collaborated with just legends, Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, Dizzy Gillespie. Do you have any memories in particular about being on stage and playing with such fabulous musicians? Can you tell me a particular memory that really still grabs you?
You don't really think of these people because they were already legends when I began to play with them. So you don't really think of them as human beings. So the funniest thing, the thing that always kind of surprised me was that they were actually human beings. I remember when I first met Miles Davis, he told me he was going to be at the studio at 2:00. And when he walked in, I was looking up in the sky for him. I was sure he was, a giant, and he was shorter than me. I couldn't believe it. Wait, this is the great Miles Davis. Dizzy Gillespie, the first time I met him, he says, "Can you do this?" And he falls on his back and he lifts his feet 7 inches off the ground and he lifts his head 7 inches off the ground. He was in his 70s at the time. And that's not an easy thing to do. You have to have really strong stomach muscle to do that. But that's the first thing he did. He didn't talk about music. He didn't talk about, what we were about to perform. He just fell on his back and did this exercise. And I said, "Yeah, Mr. Gillespie, I can do it. I just don't want to embarrass you, make you feel bad. I'll just let you do it." The hardest part about playing with these guys, like I said, who were already legends, is that, you had to get over the fact that you were playing with a legend, because it's difficult to play music with a legend. You have to play music with a person. So it would always take me, I was always a little nervous about what to say to them, how to speak to them. But once we started playing music, I quickly realized, no, this is about music and this is about sharing ideas and collaborating. So it always got easier once we started playing music.
When you're riffing and extemporizing, how does it feel? How do you know the beats it's not a piece of music that you've memorized. How are you able to be so in sync with other musicians?
Well, that's the challenge. Like you say, if you play other types of music, you know what you're going to do 3 months before the show. And you practice it and you practice it. You make sure you have it perfect. But with jazz, in a lot of forms of jazz, we know what we're going to do for the very first part and the very last part. But everything in between, like you say, is an improvisation. And so what you do is you practice improvising. You learn all your scales, you learn all your riffs, everything that you could possibly need. You have to make sure you have it ready. And then you get in the situation and somebody is playing a certain thing behind you and you go, "Ooh, I think this would be appropriate." And it has to happen in real time. So it's really a challenge. We also, as young jazz musicians, we learn improvisations of the masters. We say, well, John Coltrane played this right there, and Herbie Hancock played this right there. So you learn, you spend hours trying to learn what they did, and you develop a library of riffs and beats and stuff so that you can use anything you want when it seems appropriate.
So do you have any advice for young jazz musicians?
For young jazz musicians, I tell them, practice, 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 of course, like any musician, but also make sure you train your ears. My buddy and I, when we were 17, 18, he had a car. I didn't have a car yet, but we'd sit in the parking lot of the grocery store with the radio on, and we would sing riffs to each other. We'd do battles, like rap battles. We would do like jazz battles where I'll go, they say, "Oh yeah," no instruments. We were just training our brains to be able to react on the spot. And I think that's a really important talent, skill that you have to have as a jazz musician.
Let's talk about jazz in general. It's a music that has had its roots in slavery, but has evolved in modern times. Where do you think it's going, and what do you think it's now expressing about the times that we're living in?
Well, first of all, yes, that's really what jazz does. It expresses the times that we're living in. So, like you said, jazz was an outgrowth of former slaves who took their African roots, combined it with European influences and Caribbean influences, Native American influences, and came up with this uniquely American art form. But over the years, because it became so popular, it was America's contribution artistically to the world, just like classical music is Europe's contribution to the world. So it became popular really fast. And what's happened is that it's continued to live and evolve because all these people from all over the world, from all over America, all over the world, they all fell in love with this music, and they're all adding their individual flavor to this music. So now you have all these different branches of jazz, Caribbean influence, South America, they have influences in jazz now, Asia, Africa. Hopefully, we're going to have some influences from Abu Dhabi when we go there, because the music is wide open. You bring what you have to the party and everybody respects you. As long as you're a great musician, you're in.
When we're talking about jazz and International Jazz Day, it's a really important celebration for UNESCO. What does it mean to you to be a UNESCO Artist for Peace?
To be a UNESCO Artist for Peace, that's a huge honor. Jazz has a long history of taking the music and creating relationships with the music. I remember Dizzy Gillespie going to Japan in the early 50s, when you had to take 3 planes and boats and all sorts of things to get to Japan. It took him a week to get there. Dave Brubeck, the same thing. There's always been jazz ambassadors because it's a beautiful way to form relationships with other cultures. No words to get in the way, because words are great, but sometimes they can get in the way, especially when there's a language barrier, right? But music is its own language, and everybody understands it, or everybody feels it. So I think America would send the musicians ahead of time before they'd send the actual political ambassadors, because we could open the door and establish the initial relationship. So to be part of that group of musical ambassadors is an incredible honor.
You're a very strong advocate for education, musical education, particularly in jazz. Why, and what are you hoping from young musicians?
Well, I think jazz is such a beautiful art form that every musician should at least be exposed to jazz. But the thing on a bigger level is that jazz celebrates individuality. Like I said earlier, whatever you have to bring to the party, bring it, right? Because jazz is a really open, when you have an open platform, jazz is an open platform. So you quickly realize that I have value. If you're a musician and you come from outside of the traditional jazz world, you quickly realize I have value. And I think it teaches people to celebrate their individuality. But it also shows you how to get your individuality to work within a group. And that's really a unique aspect of jazz. Be yourself, but we're all going to make it work together.
I was actually going to ask but it's maybe a very silly question. Do you have a favorite song?
Do I have a favorite song? Ooh, that's like trying to choose your favorite kid when you have 1,000 kids. But I love, there's one song, I'll put it this way. There's one song, if you're going to get into jazz, you knew nothing about jazz. If you're going to get into it, the one song that I would tell you to start with is a Miles Davis song. It was recorded in 1959, which happens to be the year that I was born, so maybe that's why I like it so much. But anyway, it's from an album called Kind of Blue, and it's the first song on the album. And for the young people, an album is a piece of plastic that they used to put on turntables and put the needle, and the turntable would play and you would hear music. Anyway, first song is called So What? And it is so cool, okay? Check it out. And instead of imagining the musicians playing instruments, imagine they're rappers. And each one has his different style. First, Miles plays, and Miles is really sparse. You can hear him thinking between every line that he improvises. And when he does finally play again, it's so beautiful. And then John Coltrane plays, who's exactly the opposite. He plays everything, and it's equally beautiful. Then the third guy, it's a tough job because one guy played almost nothing, the other guy played everything. Cannonball Adderley, what does he do? He says, I'm just going to play joy, all right? And he just plays this most soulful, joyful solo, and it's really beautiful. And I would love if everybody who hears my voice could go out and pick up the album Kind of Blue and listen to that first song, So What?
Okay, that's what I am going to do right after this interview and listen to it on my way home. So great recommendation. Marcus, thank you so much for taking the time to do the interview with us.